So, how to say? Maybe talk about some insight or memories about the teacher and student, master and disciple relationship. I think it's all at the heart of many of our lives. And so, I guess the background is that when I was young, I was fortunate to be exposed to people who are considered to have great skills, like great scientists and philosophers. My father being a philosopher, we had all these intellectuals, writers and poets coming at our home, and then my mother was a painter. She's a painter. She's still alive, and so we had all the contemporary French artists passing by. I had an uncle who was an explorer going around the world on a sailboat alone without engine after the Second World War, and he had all kinds of, you cannot imagine the kind of friends he had. Like once we went to visit one of his friends in Paris, and there was a small note on the door saying I left on foot for Timbuktu and things like that. So very interesting characters. And also then I went myself into science. So in my lab there were 3 Nobel Prizes, and we were just having, it was still a small lab, so we were having lunch together, and it was like a lot of great scientists from abroad who used to come visit. And I was involved in classical music, so when I was young, Stravinsky when I was 16 years old was kind of a dream. And it was very intriguing. I mean, I didn't know how to formulate that at that time for sure. But when you're looking around and you're listening, I was this young boy looking at all these, big intellectuals and like that. And somehow I was admiring some of their talents, how they would speak very eloquently, and some great mathematical professor. I would have loved to solve differential equations like he would do, or play the piano like certain artists would do. At the same time, you didn't feel like drawn to them as basically as human beings. I mean, they were wonderful people, but just as well as they would be wonderful gardeners and wonderful carpenters or scientists, and there were some which were really very difficult to relate with and very grumpy and sometimes unkind. And even though they are the great genius, I mean, you can play chess like most brilliantly in the world and like Bobby Fischer and be a very difficult human being, probably very unhappy and making also life difficult to others. So there was no relation, no correlation between particular genius, having it or not having it, and then having those certain human qualities or not having them. So basically it seems it's 2 different things. So then so that means you may be tempted to develop some of those talents and go to university and become a good scientist or a good musician. But there was very little in terms of inspiration of how to become a good human being. So I think that was although I don't think I would have been able to formulate that at that time, because somehow, we are a teenager, I mean, all these things just like, still like a young animal who's discovering the world. And you probably maybe know what you don't want, but you don't really know clearly what you would want in life. And maybe you feel that you have some kind of potential. There's something in life that can be, it can be developed, it can flourish, but you don't really know what, and you don't really know how. And possibly it's a great blessing, because it seems that if you don't feel there's some kind of potential, even if it's very vague, then maybe that's where sort of kind of despair could set in, and people say, no, why should I live? And that's the most tragic question you could ask, being young. And if you don't have any sort of vision that's, even you don't know what something can be developed, then it's really, really must be very distressing, obviously. When I was about 19 or 20, there was this incredible documentaries made by Arnaud Desjardins, who was this French filmmaker, who did 4 1-hour documentary series really all the great Tibetan teachers. So I fled the Chinese division from Bhutan to Dharamsala, and then all the great teachers then who we met later on were there. And especially at the end of the first one, there was a kind of silent sequence of like almost 5-10 minutes. It's very long in a movie, I guess. You know about that. Just one face after the other, maybe 30 seconds, and it was like so impressive. I mean, there was like almost a shock in a way. It's like seeing, I don't know, 20 Socrates or 20 Saint Francis of Assisi alive in our time, all with very different features. So they were not looking the same, but at the same time a very powerful common denominator in terms of the impact on the depth and whatever. There was something there completely unusual. And so it's clearly that, and talking with Arno and with another friend who had just been there and bought some photographs, really decided me to go there. And I had a 6-month holiday in my university program, and I was hesitating to do a big trip to go to Japan, do some judo or whatever. And unfortunately I went to Darjeeling and met then Kangyur Rinpoche, my old teacher, and then that time Dilgo Rinpoche and the Prisons Kamapa, and Paul Rinpoche and many other great teachers, because there was about 20 of them in that area, between Darjeeling, Kalimpong, Sonada and Rumtek. It was amazing, the constellation of great masters who were living there. So you just had to go one door to the other to meet them. So I didn't know, I was 20, I could hardly speak any English. I had learned Greek, Latin and German at school, but it's my father's choice. Didn't have very much after that. But so I was with a small dictionary, getting my way to Darjeeling. My vocabulary was so poor that at the end of my trip, when I got typhoid, and when I went to the hospital in Delhi, they said, "Are you sick?" Because I had a beard, and they said, "No, I'm French." And then I met Kangyur Rinpoche, and he was leaving below Darjeeling after a forest, about 20 minutes by jeep. In the other side of Darjeeling, very little traffic there, completely outside. Just 2 wooden cottages, both together. 2 rooms were about the size of this room, and there was a few steps. And there's all these wooden, old Nepali cottages with tin sheet in the Nepali village. And on one side there was full wall filled with bundles of books wrapped in leather, which he had brought from Tibet to Pemapur and Assam. And then there was a bed where he was staying with the window and all the Kanchenjunga on the back, another bed in front, and then below there was a small room with a kitchen, and there was his wife and the old Lama who was copying text. And then everybody more is sleeping on the floor in those 2 rooms. And I came like that, and with my rucksack, and they sort of gave me hospitality, and sort of slept there with everyone for 2-3 weeks. Retrospectively, looks like very rude in a way. But then I never made anything feel that, when are you coming to stay with us? There were only 7 people in those 2 rooms. And for me it was very, very, I immediately sort of just sat there and tried to meditate. I didn't know what it means, but I didn't have to, I guess. And Kangyur Rinpoche was just sitting there all day, doing his prayers and not moving at all, sometimes reading some books and sitting there. And so I was sitting in front, and 3 or 4 hours in the morning, then they would bring a tray with some vegetables and rice, and then a small break, and then I would start again in the afternoon like that for non-stop for 3 weeks, and having back aches and knee aches. But basically I didn't know, nobody gave me instruction, because his son Tukur Pema came in the end. He was in Benares studying with his brother, and anyway my English was so poor, but simply sitting there and almost spontaneously felt inspired to do and trying to do, and that came sort of as something obvious, was to have this incredible being in front of me and then trying to sort of blend. So this some kind of what turned out to be the most essential practice for all through life, which is called Guru Yoga. But it was very intuitive because of the quality of the person. So it seems the right thing to try. Is here I was this small idea, was this extraordinary idea. So after almost, sometimes I was even trying to synchronize, my breath on his. I mean, because sort of this idea of wishing of merging with someone like him, and that was and then just sort of trying to let my mind stay in that state and then soak in his presence, and which was at the same time very strong, but it's not the kind of strength of a very dominating figure that makes you shrink, but more like a incredibly powerful source of inspiration, and that you are in presence of the full and complete aspect of humanity that you can find. So that's impressive, that's powerful, but that's powerful not in a diminishing way, but in an inspiring way that opens you, and then you don't want to put any barriers. You don't need to have any protection. You don't need to any other consideration that you would feel meeting someone, but complete sort of openness. And this idea of merging was very, very, it was not, contrary to what happens later, there was not much distraction at that time. It was so new, in fact, and so impressive that I was more taken by the strength of the presence. But it was not weird either. I was not sort of getting in trance or divagating or having experiences of light or altered state of consciousness. And I never had that in my life anyway. So it was something very simple, very profound, and extraordinarily revealing that this is the sort of most precious state of mind that you can ever think of, in terms of, inner enrichment, balance, strength, and freedom, and the quality of just this idea of merging with the teacher's mind. So that's kept on going for some time. And then Tuku Pemongyan arrived, and he just gave me instruction basically on the same line, the merging with the teacher's mind, being one with the teacher's mind, wherever you are, whatever you do. And interestingly enough, after that, for almost 40 years, I've been fortunate to receive wonderful teachings and I try to practice a little bit. But somehow the Guru Yoga is always the heart of everything, and this is the teachers themselves say that everything take place within the space of merging with the teacher's mind. Of course, the idea is to find the teacher within yourself, but to be exposed to such great teachers, you don't have to think in those ways. I think the merging itself is beyond finding within yourself the teachers outside. It's an incredible discovery and very comforting and powerful. And later, when I did practice, the usual practice of sadhanas and yidams and things like that, Kangyur Rinpoche always said that if you think that the teacher and the yidam are separate, then there will be no progress, no blessing, no accomplishment. Then Kangyur Rinpoche gave me some hints. At that time, I didn't know. I have no idea what was good. Is also I was totally fresh. There's no books, and I haven't read any of them anyway. And so everything was completely new, and it's like suddenly every piece of teaching, I didn't know it was high, low, medium, no expectation, and no pre-knowledge, sort of textual knowledge of the teachings. Everything's completely brand new. So he gave me try helping me to relate to the mind. One day he took a bell and did like that and asked me who was making the sound, whether it was the bell or the hand or what do you call that thing. So where the sound was coming from, so I was sort of puzzled. So things like that, which later on you could interpret that, trying to introduce you to nature or whatever, but it seems very natural, and it's certainly puzzling and makes you think, and it's wonderful that you does that, and you don't solve it intellectually, but it certainly gets somewhere in your mind. When I left, it was basically the main thing that was with me is remembering the this incredible teacher, and trying to continue the same thing of merging my limited mind with his limitless mind. And Dilgo Moshe told me at that time, his son, that when you're far away and whenever you have devotion, then so the teacher will see like a small lamp that will burn more or less bright according to your devotion. So I thought maybe, so because Rinpoche can see where the light is. So I thought, well, that's great. So I was trying and thinking maybe he sees how bright is my devotion or not. Maybe, why not? I don't know. But I sort of, it was natural at that time, think like that. Then at the end of the stay, I asked him a few, I'm not, naturally, I don't have tendency to ask a lot of divination. Because I didn't know much about that. But even now, it's not my type. So, but I did ask him a few big things about my life. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I finish my PhD or come here? He said, just finish what you have to do and then you can come. So I asked him a few other major orientation in life, and he told me, and that was it. And then I went to a few places in India. It was almost too much, in a sense, to make sense out of it. And so I traveled. I went to Kashmir, I went to here and there, Banaras, I got sick. And finally I went back to France altogether after 3 months, having lost 10 kilos with my rucksack. And then there, when I arrived there, then suddenly I realized, the back home in a way made me realize all the ground that had been covered through this meeting. I mean, how it had changed my whole perception, much more than when I left Darjeeling. I didn't know, whether I could not say 100%. Oh yes, I'll see you next year or something like that. I have no idea what would happen. Whether I didn't think I would maybe never see them again. I didn't formulate that, but I didn't think either. This is it. It was too strong almost to make complete sense of it. So then I went back to France, and then when I arrived there, then it was clear. All my mind was constantly remembering my teacher, going back there, and then I started, trying to practice the same way I was practicing in front of him, and then it carried on very naturally and very, very happily and spontaneously. I didn't have to force myself, and it was very, very nourishing and helpful. Doing that early morning before going to Pasteur Institute, and really make complete different sense of what I was doing. So obviously then after a year, when I had a holiday, it was clear, one way just go back. So I did that for 5-6 years. And I didn't learn much. I asked him, should I learn Tibetan? He said, oh no, there's so many interesting things, you'll get distracted. Just continue just to practice. So just few words of instruction basically every year when Kamongal was there. There's a few indications, but not very much. For like 5 or 6 years there was something like sadhanas and hardly, I don't remember even mantras and like that. It was mostly Guru Yoga and a few pieces of advice, but not really much formal teaching for a long time. Then he had said I could come after finishing my PhD, so I did. In 1992 I went to Darjeeling and then stayed with him. So then he started to give me a little more formal teaching, like through his son, Guangzhou. But that was also very nice because, again, there was no translation around. So when I finished the refuge, I started doing prostration in France, 100 a day, so it took a long time obviously. And then when I reached Darjeeling, I finished the rest. But then when he gave me the bodhicitta teaching, I was almost like, wow, because I never heard of it. So it's true. So it was fantastic. That evening where I finished in the prostration, he gave me just 10 minutes of the next step with the prayer of the bodhicitta and the principle of it. So it's a fantastic discovery. I've been given like a whole book of treasures, like a completely new thing to be with. And similarly, when I finished that, when the Vajrasattva explanation came, it was like mind-blowing in a way. I never heard of it at all. So I'm very grateful that I could go with such a fresh mind to all those steps that now often we have read everything about it. We say, when I will come to that, and then of course, I'm sure that most of us do it with great earnest. And even now, I've heard so many times, 25 or 30 times the Monroe teaching, each time I hear it, it really resounds like so important and precious. But I think to practice it the first time, when you just hear it for the first time, I think it has a special impact. And so I felt very grateful, and I wish that to others that it may happen like that. So it went like that, step by step. Then when it came to Guru Yoga, I sort of felt very much at home. Sometimes what I feel I was doing from the time. Just before he passed away, I've been in Darjeeling for 3 years. Then he said, well, maybe it's a good time to start learning. It will be good to start learning Tibetan. And he said, because it will be helpful to clear some hesitations and some misconception or doubts or whatever, clarification of the teaching. Even there, after 2 years, after being a student for 7 years, 6 years outside and 2 years with him, I still didn't know the alphabet. I was the last of all because a few more Westerners then came. Some people we know, like Gerard Baudet, my mother, and Anne Benson and all that. And they all learned the alphabet very quickly. And I was the last one. They said, why don't you learn Tibetan at last? 75, when Kangyur Rinpoche passed away, then Khyentse Rinpoche was very close to him. Before I came, they had exchanged teachings. Khyentse Rinpoche had asked the whole Nyingma Gyumbum, that's the 100,000 tantras of the Nyingmapa from Kangyur Rinpoche, because he had both a regular lineage and a vision lineage. And so that was in Bhutia Busti, above below Darjeeling. And then he also received with Kalo Rinpoche the Taksham, all the termas of Taksham, so maybe several months probably. And then in return, Kangyur Rinpoche asked Khyentse Rinpoche to bestow the Ninti Gyapshe. He had received, but just to make an exchange connection. So they were very close. So when he passed away, Khyentse Rinpoche was in Sikkim, and then Pema asked him, requested him to come right away. So he came and did the first ceremonies, and then he gave some teachings also to all of us. Then he left, and he came back for the cremation. So then he sort of took all of Kangyur Rinpoche's disciples in his hands. So that was a very wonderful transition in a way. Well, not myself, I stayed for another 4 years in Darjeeling in the Hermitage, and actually at the end it turned out I was the only one that never left the monastery for 1 day in 4 years. Everyone else, the whole family, they all went at least once somewhere. But I didn't move for 4 years, not a single day. Then one time, Tukupa Mwangir had taken Khyentse Rinpoche to France. That time I didn't go. This time okay. And because, I don't know why, they were spending the frescoes with the artists, helping putting the colors. And then they established something in France. There was a 3 years retreat going to start. And so they were going to start the first 3 years retreat, and with all mostly Kangyur Rinpoche students. So then somehow I was assuming, and everyone was assuming, that I would join, because time-wise I was one of the first students. So and I've been staying now 7 years in India non-stop without going back. So I myself thought, well, that's maybe the end of a period, of a time. Maybe this will be a new chapter back to Europe after 7 years. So I went with Khyentse Rinpoche, and then just before, to double check, said, starting this, and maybe I don't know, what should I do? I guess to go for long, I was probably thinking that I would stay there. So what should I plan? Should I leave my rucksack behind, or part of it? And then that was, I think, the second big turning point in the teacher-student relationship. Is contrary to all expectation, Khyentse Rinpoche said, well, as long as I'm alive, why don't you stay with me? And then you can do retreat some other time. Oh, wow. That was a big one. So I told that to Rinpoche the moment he was quite surprised. I think he had counted me in the participants. And but I felt very relieved, I must say, for some reason. Not that I didn't want to do a retreat, But the idea of returning to France was not a very bright prospect. And so I went anyway. Rinpoche gave all the teachings and I received all the instructions. And then I went back with him. And then, he was living in Bhutan mostly. And Bhutan was not a place that you could, still now you can get just like that. So he had said, no, stay with me, but he spent half of the year in Bhutan. So in the plane I said, okay, now what should I do? So he said, you just go back to Darjeeling. And when I go to India, I'll call you. And then so we landed, and then he was hosted at the Bhutan embassy, because he was the teacher of the royal family of Bhutan, so he was treated very. So then in the morning, the ambassador came to pay respect, and he said, can you call the Queen Mother? I want to take this boy with me. He had not told me anything. So he called, and the next day I was in Bhutan for another 8 years. And so, he didn't stay the whole year, but he spent usually from April to September, October every year, doing all the ceremonies and doing a retreat. And one time we did how many months? 4 months, just a silent retreat. So we were inside the retreat. So it was again another incredible time.
Did any of your friends from France were attracted to what you were doing and were trying to contact you and follow you?
When I was in Darjeeling, I would get for the 7 years I would get a letter every 2 months. There's no radio, no telephone. I was really cut from everything. I used to send aerograms saying, I'm fine, I hope you are well. And that was about it.
And your parents, how did they take that?
Well, my father was very, very disappointed. My mother joined me there.
Like typical mother.
Well, she became a nun and she did 3 years retreat, so we had parallel and sometime together, sometime desynchronized, but doing the same thing at different time, different place. So there was fine.
How old is she now?
She's 84. My father died 2 years ago, and so he was very shocked because he had invested so much for me to be a scientist and all that stuff.
You are a scientist.
Yeah. So when I told him, he was very shocked, but he didn't say anything, which was great.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Huh?
Do you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I had one sister, and then I have a half brother because my father remarried, but she was younger than me. But the thing is, he didn't make a huge drama, which is very kind of him, because if he had blown the fuse, I don't know. I think I would probably have gone anyway, but in a very difficult atmosphere, feeling. He was silent, very stern, and I heard later on he cried. He went to see one of his friends who told me when my father died 2 years ago, I could go to France and attend him in the hospital for 3 weeks, just until his last breath. And some of his old friends told me that he came and he was crying, my son is lost. But then after that, of course, there was we never had stopped speaking each other. He came to Darjeeling once and sat there for 10 minutes in front of Kangyur Rinpoche. Didn't say much either, but he could see nothing looks crazy and looks okay. And then when Khyentse Rinpoche came to Paris, he met him once, and he came once to Bhutan. Queen Mother invited him, so he did meet all this great teacher. I don't know. He never was saying what it really meant for him, but he saw that. So I feel it's a great blessing. And then when we did that book together, then the first time we talked about ideas and we explained each other. Before, when I used to go back, I would only, update him about Tibet situation when I started to know a little bit more about it. So, because he was one of the French writers to first speak about it sort of loudly, and people, at the time nobody was speaking much about Tibet in the 70s and like that. But we never thought, why we never went into. I didn't want to impose on him some ideas that obviously were not his, and I sort of feel a bit shy. And so it's only when we did that book together then we spoke very openly about ideas.
Did it bring you closer together?
Very much, of course. But it was not like in the American edition of the book they said the father meeting again the son. It was not that. It was more like we wanted to know more he wanted to know more about Buddhism, about more why I did that, and why Buddhism has an impact now in modern world, and what place it feels that philosophy and do not feel, and science cannot feel perhaps. And so he was curious, seeing the interest about Buddhism in the West, and why I did. So he was interested about. So we had really a real debate of ideas. It was greatly facilitated, and which helped to understand each other better. But it wasn't emotionally to see, I always love you and this and that. So it wasn't at all like that. And at that time when I left, he we began to write philosophical books, but he was also a teacher, philosophy teacher in high school, college. So he was posted here and there. So he was had not have bad memories at all. But I think the seeds for interest in spirituality was more from my mother's side and my uncle's side. They were reading all these books and so discussing that. So my father was more like a free thinker. He was very much agnostic. Definitely there wasn't very much. He was more like anti-clerical and all that stuff. And I was a bit like that. We were a bit leftist. And So then when I went back with Khyentse Rinpoche in Bhutan, then again it was a very not tough, but in between, I'd also gone to Delhi to print some books, Tibetan books for our monastery from Darjeeling. And at one point, I sort of sat there and said, it's getting too easy in a way. Something is drifting. The presence of a very powerful teacher, but there was something completely unfinished. Not that it's finished now, but it was definitely much more unfinished in terms of, I've received so much, but it was not the time to get loose about practice, about some source of inspiration that keeps you, on track. So and his son Tukupe Mongyal is so lovely, and now he's getting quite strict with his student, but he was mostly someone who was extremely kind and translating for his father, but not the kind of, at that time we are the same age or so he was quite young, and he was not the person who sort of was pushing you hard on the track. So it needed again someone of the caliber of Kangyur Rinpoche for me to dig deeper, in the in the ego and all this stuff. I mean, not that I was thinking in those terms, but I felt that there's definitely some more thing to crush within. That's scary. I needed this strong inspiration. So Khyentse Rinpoche certainly was someone of that caliber. So especially, he was so kind, so smiling, but when I was in Bhutan, I tell you, that's a very different picture. For the first 8 months or 1 year, everything I was doing was wrong. And it was not anything that I was actually doing wrong. Just putting this here was not right. It was scolding me and sort of, it was non-stop scolding basically. Nothing right. So and there was no logic no logic. Yes, there was a logic, but there was no obvious explanation. I had not dropped something. I didn't really put it in the wrong place. It was just not the wrong place, whatever, or the wrong thing to do. So I was constantly like that, and I could it was not formulated in my mind, but I was seeing that's what's really is something that I cannot see, but is really getting at it. And I remember once I was in central Bhutan, in Bumtown. He was giving the transmission for the Kangyur, which was this 103 volumes reading over 3 months. And there was no electricity. We're in this sort of bamboo hut in the middle of the field. And one night I came out in the dark, and there was this big river below, and the noise, and completely in the dark. And I sat there and I said, what's wrong with me, or something like that. But it was not at all that I was doubting, desperate. But he said, there's something really, I was sort of, I just don't understand, but it's wonderful, something like that. I knew that it was really what I needed. And that thing was that chemistry was happening, and I was feeling very grateful and still absolutely not understanding what was going on. So I was there alone in the dark at night and looking and say, what this is quite extraordinary, and that's, but sort of nice. And so and that lasted for quite a while. There was moments where I could see that it was all not a game, but it was the way of teaching, because he could sometimes switch completely. And once I remember we were in Parotaksang in 1981, the first year I was 80, for 14 days. There's the Tiger Nest, this is incredible monastery in the cliff. And he stayed 14 days and he offered 100,000 lamps there, and he gave some initiations. And that's also the place where Kangyur Rinpoche had discovered Therma of Vajakilaya. And so I wanted, I just suggested that, or requested Kangyur Rinpoche, can we do a Ganak Chakra offering based on that? And actually at that time he was writing the long sadhana of that at request of the family. So he also had some vision. So he said, but this is not in a book, you only have one book, so I had mine. So how can we do with only one book? I said, okay, so I copied by hand the whole thing 2-3 times over 10 days. And then, I have some books. He didn't say anything. And then when we went, there's a secret cave, this is the heart of Parotaksang, where Guru Rinpoche said to us, stayed in sort of meditated, which is below the main temple. It's very, very small. It's like a bit like this. And so normally it's closed. There's a door, and you open once a year when there's anniversary of I don't know what. Until on the Tsechu of the 6th month. So Kangyur Rinpoche has to open. So we went in. He didn't say anything. He said, bring the book. So then he sat there, and there was maybe another monk, or maybe not. And then he said he just took the book and with the thing. And then that time he just took my hand for 10 minutes. And that, was like the whole, the doors of heaven opening. Like a flow of nectar. I was not hardly reading the text, so he was taking my hand and doing that sadhana. And that was the, showing that the whole thing was sort of a way of, but that, filled the whole treasure of Amrita for filling the tanks for another 5 years or so. So there was this moment where you could see that it was not that he was, because he was also so kind with everyone else, basically. So it was definitely something good. And after that, what I got out of it for sure is some kind of, besides Khyentse Rinpoche, I mean, really fear of nobody, any king or, I don't know, people, the big shots that people find impressive or something, and they don't feel very impressive much after someone like Khyentse Rinpoche. So that gives you a very profound idea of what can be really the strength of, strength of wisdom, strength of a teacher. And even his wife would scold him, say, "What do you have to do with this boy all the time scolding him like that?" He didn't say anything. So I don't know, it was the right time. And so I'm grateful. I guess I would still need that very much now. I don't know what will happen. But I stayed many years, 12 years with him, non-stop. Sometimes he would send me for a month or two to do something, printing books or like that. And you could see, how necessary in those days for me, definitely, it would probably be necessary now, but there's not that much choice. But that somehow you drift very slowly sometimes, and you don't notice. It's like when you close your eye and walk, you open your eyes, you see that you have not gone straight at all. Or if you try to close your eye while you're in a swimming pool, you won't make the whole length, you will hit so you don't know, but you're actually drifting. So that's kind of feeling, when I come back to him, suddenly things, the needle sort of compass goes straight north again. I think that's also a very powerful reminder of the presence of the teacher sets everything straight somehow. You cannot fool around too much. And that's what I think is very precious. And even if he doesn't tell you precisely, but the very fact of his presence, you cannot just make becoming all over the place, completely fancy, crazy ideas. So that's also very helpful in the presence of the teacher. Now the drama is what to say. You went with Ramjan Rinpoche's grandson to Kansas City, and then they said, well, last time someone came was 8 years ago. So if you tell those very nice people there, without a enlightened teacher, you can go nowhere. It's like a condemnation. so it's not fair. So there must be other ways. Myself, I don't see how I would have stayed that long if it wasn't for the inspiration of those teachers. But at the same time, you see people, I met people who met Khyentse Rinpoche for a few hours, and it's really changed their lives. So I think it's possibly not a question of time exposure, I hope. And that, and it's very different to meet a teacher or not to meet a teacher. That's the thing. People who met the Dalai Lama, for instance, they have seen 100 times on TV, and when they spend 5 minutes with him, they come up completely, like disheveled with tears in their eyes, which certainly didn't have. They see him on TV, they seems a very, very nice person and one of the leaders of this world, but they don't have this impact. But they spend 5 minutes with him and suddenly boom, And even hardcore scientists, in those meetings with science, there was one who became very, very close to the Dalai Lama, and he likes him very much. It's Paul Ekman, he's one of the specialists of emotions. And when he was invited to this Mind and Life conference in 2000, the first one I attended myself, he just went because his daughter was dying of the idea of meeting the Dalai Lama. So since he was invited and he could take a family member, he said okay. She pushed him so hard, but he was not at all interested basically. So he came, and then of course the very nature of the exchange and the debates was so rich, so powerful that he became very, very intellectually sort of enthralled by the meeting. It was fantastic. But then it's not until a half week when finally, because of his daughter, at the tea break, he asked his translator if he could just have a few minutes. And so he came next to his honest sit, and he just sat there, and his honest to do the same thing. He took their hands for 10 minutes while talking. And then Paul Ekman, who has been working for all his life on deciphering human emotions, he said, I never thought that human goodness can be palpable. He said it did feel like a stream. And he said, I never thought this is possible. He said, there is something there that was absolutely physical, and I was sort of feeling my body with just kindness, and he said it completely changed. And he said first the discussion, then that. When he went back, he was writing the Emotion Revealed, that's sort of a book, that culmination of 30 years of work. He said he had to revise 6 chapters. His owners like him very much because he's so intelligent and so direct and so genuine that they have spent 3 days together doing a dialogue on emotion. I listened part of it, it's wonderful, that's going to be a book. But he became very close, just somehow the triggering factor was these few seconds, and then of course was repeated over time. But that was something that he said is it's not again something non-scientific, because it was not like reading his mind or something, but there was something more than what you would expect is. And so I think and then he used to be apparently very short-tempered. I became very good friend with him, but and after 6 months he went back. His wife said, what happens? Some months you became angry. And he realized he hadn't thought of it, but he didn't have any kind of tantrum for several months. So something must have changed. I think that's really the power of and sometimes it's really difficult to explain. Like again, not something mysterious or vibes and like that. Dalai Lama is someone that's really completely demystified that. He often says at the beginning of his public lecture, if you expect that Dalai Lama has some kind of power and all that, no, you'll be very disappointed. You came for a wrong reason. If I had something power, I will take care of my own knee. I will do something about my knee. No healing power. But then once there's still something about the mere presence of someone, the strength and the quality. Once we were, for the 50th anniversary of the Human Rights Declaration in Paris, he was invited with the Nobel Prize. And then there was this Amnesty International rock concert. And they invited him as a surprise guest. There was the stadium of Bercy, filled with 15,000 young people, and they have no idea. Basically, they probably heard of the Dalai Lama, but all between 14 and 17, so probably very little knowledge. And they didn't announce it the last second because there was this surprise. So we were sitting backstage, and he was holding the hand of an electrician there for another 10 minutes. And then we went on stage. They said the surprise of the evening, the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet. Boom! On stage of the rock concert. And then amazing, those 15,000 young people, they just got up and then huge applause. They measure those things, the decibels. It was by large the biggest of the evening. I swear, if a politician, the French president or the archbishop has been there, would have been booed like. They wouldn't have stayed for 5 seconds. And then something very strange happened. In rock concert, they don't go quiet. First he went very quiet, and then at some he said a few things. He said, I don't know anything about your songs, but I can see the life in your eyes, and he spoke about human rights. And then a group start to applaud, And then instead of a usual roar, they went, there was shh. People. So you never heard that in a rock concert. People going shh. So then at the end, then I started translating in English, and everyone went, whoa! No, they didn't want English. They didn't want French. So I stood quiet, and they spoke in English. Of course, everyone knew it's very simple. And at the end, same thing, huge applause. And then we went back. Then I was in tears because I thought, totally unprepared. It's not like the usually bunch of groupies that comes for the Dalai Lama. They didn't know, they didn't come for him, and they were completely receptive, completely attuned to them, to him, and him to them. And it was complete mystery, That immediate sort of. He connected with everyone completely, instantly, powerfully. They were completely there. And that was, you say, well, that's the power of compassion, of wisdom, whatever. You cannot fabricate that. No amount of PR, or, preparation and pre-advertisement and conditioning and warming up the assistants. It was completely spontaneous and so powerful. It's only the power of the quality of human being. You cannot fabricate that. This is the ultimate test, in a way, of someone unprepared, an audience that doesn't care a priori for him, and react completely like that. So that shows, I think the power of, you cannot make that up. Yeah, there was some these very moving times, and also once he was invited at the Cathedral of Geneva. And I have not been raised as a Christian, but Cathedral was impressive. And then there was l'Abbé Pierre, who was a very famous French activist. He was very, very courageous. He founded the Companion of Emmaus for the poor. Once there was a very harsh winter in France, -10 or something, and there was many people dying in the street. So he went and stormed a public radio, and middle of the news, and says, we need 20,000 blankets right now. And then he got them, within an hour. And then he became very well known. And he's been always, coming with all these decorations, sitting at the door when they want to invite squatters. So he was the most popular French person for many years. So he was there, and then there was the pastor, because it was a Protestant cathedral. And then they invited his Holiness to give the sermon for the Sunday morning Mass. And so we came in. There was completely packed. Those cathedrals are empty nowadays. Completely packed, and there was 2,000 people outside. So we came in from the main alley, the Dalai Lama, l'Abbé Pierre, and the pastor of Geneva. And I was following behind and then with the organs, full music, walking all the way to the altar. And then he started giving the Sunday morning sermon for 20 minutes. That was hard to translate. It was so moving, because can you imagine that 20 years ago? Unthinkable. And everybody was so moved and like that. See, the world is changing. This is the power of compassion. So I think that's. So there's fortunately, still some beings like that alive. It's good for our world. So I think even we cannot, I cannot myself. I have no chance to live at his feet all the time, but I'm meeting often enough, and each time is a kind of, a regenerating experience for a few days. But I'm sure that the quality of that is so intense that just meeting him for a public meeting or like that, I think is so precious.